Good morning, everyone. So wonderful to be here, to be back in person. It's been an awesome and exhausting week. So we've had students back in the classrooms. I've been fortunate enough to be able to visit lots of classrooms and see so many people. But I think there's so much going on. So we really wanted to talk with instructors to get a sense of what your questions were, and then also just to remind everyone of some important policies. So obviously the last year has been difficult. Being remote and being away from each other has been a real challenge. But we are returning with lots of information, lots of best practices from our institution and other institutions so that we can tackle being back in person effectively. So as I mentioned, it's been an exciting week. We've had music, we've had students, but also been a challenging week. So I think that some of the things that went well, especially having our instructional support assistants being prepared to be in every classroom and really supporting faculty with getting back to getting familiar with the technology, getting students through the security lines, getting everyone in place, I think has gone really well. Couple of things that we've learned, I think in particular, we're still struggling through the question of how to make sure everyone can hear when instructors are masked, when students are masked, and when we have students who are both online and in the classroom. So I think that we're gonna work through some of those issues. And then also finding that we might need some more detailed instruction on using some of the technology like the owls that are sitting in some of the classrooms. Overall, though, I think the first week has gone really well. I think that I've seen lots of smiling faces from faculty and students, and there's a general sense of excitement. I think this is really important. I think that what I've heard for the past 18 months is that people love being in New York. Our students love being in Teachers College and love that in-person experience. We will always have a certain number of online courses that we offer, and we certainly feel committed to doing really amazing remote instruction. But it's also the case that we are really committed to being on campus. Some of our programs are actually accredited for in-person instruction. And again, students really want to learn in New York and work with the populations that are here. So what we want to do is try to return to campus as safely as possible, but with some flexibility. So the flexibility is primarily around giving exceptions for folks who really have health-related concerns, documented health-related concerns, and in some cases for some students who had issues related to being able to travel. One of the things I keep thinking about is that we're part of a community, and it feels like individuals making decisions on their own don't affect other people, but we really want to be mindful of how our individual decisions impact the entire community. And so the approach that we've really taken has been one that is what I would say maybe left of center a bit. So on the one hand, so we can go to the next slide. On the one hand, some schools are really giving maximal flexibility to everyone, to students and to faculty, to make choices about what happens in their classrooms and with their own instruction for this semester. And other places like Columbia are saying there's no choice, everybody's going to be in person, bottom line, period. And so TC, we are really trying to take a somewhat more flexible approach, acknowledging that some people do have health-related concerns that make it risky to be online, in person, but also that when an individual student makes a choice about not coming to class, that affects the instructor, the mode of instruction, their classmates, and when faculty make choices to teach online, that impacts all of the students in the class. So one of the examples is that we know that our immigrant students who are on visas who cannot take all of their courses online. And so it may feel like you're making an individual choice, but that may affect someone's ability to learn in the US. So TC is prioritizing in-person instruction with some flexibility. We'll talk more about the specifics and how this all works, and really trying to balance the institutional needs with our recognition that this is a complex time and people are working through so many different issues. Keep in mind, this is temporary. I have no interest in policing people's choices in this way going forward, but I think for this particular moment, it was really important to give ourselves the best chance of being successful in returning to campus and making sure that everyone has the very best possible experience in the classroom. So if you take one thing away from today's town hall, it should be that remote instruction is for COVID-related reasons only. Please work with us on this. I know that it feels overly restrictive, but again, we're trying to hold the entire community in mind. I certainly look forward to seeing you all on campus. And next, Hank Perkowski, our Vice President for Finance, is going to talk about classroom health and safety. Hank?
Great. Thank you, Stephanie. I will talk a little bit about the college's classroom health and safety. And I guess one of the first things that we want to discuss is, when will the college make a return to go online? God forbid we ever needed to get there. And, that's not really something we can say is a specific point of contact, but we would definitely be looking at many factors in order to make that determination. So, and they are not specific just to Teachers College, but just really within New York City and the country as a whole, but more in the city. So we're looking at positive cases on the upper West Side in New York City, hospitalizations, and just working with Columbia University to understand what the larger trends are, as well as we would make decisions if there's any clusters which should perhaps arise within the college itself. But again, there is no single point to say that, if positive cases reaches a certain percentage, we'll go online, but there's many factors that kind of lead into that. And then for a specific class, that is something that we want to do at the college level as well. So there'll be some information a little bit later of accommodations we can make for specific students who may need to go online due to exposure or a positive test with COVID. But again, I'll leave that a little later for the other folks to talk about. Contact tracing. So the colleges started contact tracing at the beginning when the pandemic broke out. So we've been doing that roughly since about April 2020, and that is done through the college's environmental health and safety office. And they have many reporting things that they need to do specifically with the Department of Health. So on a daily basis, they've been doing this for 16 months or so at this time, and will continue to do it going forward. They need to report in exactly what kind of exposures we've had at the college. And the way to get environmental health and safety in on the loop of if you've tested positive or a student has tested positive is to really report it on the daily health screening. We actually changed the wording on that probably like a week or two ago to talk about have you been exposed to somebody who has tested positive for COVID in the last two weeks? And then we've added some language there that says, which has not already been reported to environmental health and safety. So if someone has been reported to environmental health and safety, they should read that, and they would have potentially been cleared to come back on campus. But that's really the best way to report it. I mean, environmental health and safety will also find out about these things through student affairs. So if someone submits a positive test, or even for faculty and staff through the HR office, someone would submit a positive test through there. But really the fail safe is if you hear someone tested positive, they think they've been exposed, report it on the daily health screening, and that will really call to action that group. And then the last piece is masks. As everybody I'm sure is aware, we have a mask mandate at the college. And that's basically everywhere in the college except for the Russell Courtyard and any other outdoor spaces which we might have. So we expect students to wear masks in the classroom, but the instructors have an option to wear a mask. And we would ask that if you are not going to wear a mask, please social distance from the students within the classroom. And If physically the space does not allow that to happen, we would actually ask you to wear a mask. And if a student for some reason does not wear a mask, we're not really expecting a large non-compliance. We actually are expecting most people to comply. We're all excited to get back in the classroom setting, but I would suggest that if a student's not wearing a mask, just ask them to do it. And I would, because mistakes are going to happen. And so we will, I'm sure the student will put on their mask, and if they refuse to, you can ask them to leave the classroom. And if that doesn't work, you can call public safety at 3333, and they will come up and try to resolve the problem or escort the student out. And if it actually does get to that point, and we're really hoping it doesn't, that will be reported to Students Affairs by public safety, and the student will be subject to the student code of conduct, just like any other student acting inappropriately in the classroom, whether it was related to COVID or not. So that's what we hope to do in the classrooms as it related to health and safety. And then I'll pass it over to Tom Rock, who will talk a little bit about students.
Great. Thank you so much, Hank. And it is, thank you all for being here this morning with us for this really important information. Really appreciate it. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the designation that we've done for students and where the process where we've granted them approval for remote learning, remote access this semester. So the Division of Student Affairs, we began processing requests for remote instruction for students over the summer. And as Stephanie mentioned, our primary focus was to be able to address and respond to students who had a travel or a visa restriction, perhaps preventing them to get back to the United States in a timely fashion to start the fall semester. We wanted to be responsive to that group of students. And we also wanted to be able to respond to students with some real health related reasons that would prevent them from being able to be in person. We really tried very, very hard to make sure that the students understood that this was our approvals were based on need. These were not based on preferences, and that this really was not an option for students. They had to go through an approval process. So we thank you for working with us on that and funneling students to us. We had developed a survey that the students responded to, and there actually was a cross-college committee who was able to review the responses, respond, and we tried to approve as many as we really could. And so we also did allow some space for students to tell us some other extenuating circumstances. And they did. They shared every extenuating circumstance with us, but we really felt like we needed to hear a little bit more from the students, what are some of the other reasons? So some of the other reasons that we were able to approve students for remote learning this fall included maybe a caretaker who's caretaking someone who's immune compromised. We had students who had babies. They have an infant during the pandemic. We have students who are pregnant. And so these were just some of the examples of other reasons that we felt like we wanted to approve students for remote learning. We don't think faculty need to ask students why they were approved. Hopefully no one is doing that. I hope that you can trust in the process of if we granted someone approval, there was obviously legitimate reason for that. And sometimes students were sharing some really confidential information with us and the committee that I don't think they would always be comfortable sharing with faculty. So I think you can just hope that there was a really thorough and legitimate process and that these students have been reviewed for that. We actually met with students as well if we didn't understand their reason. So we did not approve students who are against the vaccine. We did not approve students who were uncomfortable. We actually met with them to try to help them get over whatever discomfort that they were feeling. We, again, reiterated to them that remote learning is not the solution. And so if a student was against taking the vaccine, they did not get approval for remote learning. That, again, was not the option. So we are still working with a few students in that situation. There's really not a lot of options for that student. And then, of course, we have some students, going submitting exemptions for the vaccine, and that those students are not remote students. If they got the approved exemption, those students would be in your class in person and going through weekly testing. And so we have approved, we've approved 595 students who have been approved. And for those students that we did approve, we submitted those approval lists to the registrar's office. The registrar's office then is coordinating with the Digital Futures Initiative group, the DFI group, who then liaises with you, the faculty and the instructors, and then assisting with the access code. And the reason that we really had to formalize this process is that the registrar also, we're required as an institution to report student modality numbers to New York State. So that's also why we really had to centralize it. So as of today, as I mentioned, 595 students have been approved for remote across the college. We are expecting a few more to trickle in, but we are hoping to close that process down momentarily and then take students on a case-by-case basis. And when I say close down, we want to close down that process for the long-term full semester remote learning approvals. And we have to do that before add drop, especially for our international students, because OASS has some reporting responsibilities as well. So I wanted to just mention that. And also I wanted to mention that if a student discloses a disability of any kind and requires accommodations that do not include remote access, you should always refer them to OASID to determine what type of support might be needed or that they could possibly be eligible for. So that's the information that I wanted to share. I'm sure there are questions, but I would like to now turn it over to Lalita, who will go over some additional information from the DFI group.
Thank you, Tom. We are so happy that we could be here to share additional information with you. And as the semester has been underway for a couple of days, we've learned some things, as the provost said earlier. So we just wanted to review a few points related to this temporary remote access from the perspective of the Digital Futures Institute, insofar as we are charged with supporting courses and course instructors to allow and find ways to incorporate participation through remote means for students who've been designated. So I wanted to review a couple of kind of broad things, and then we're going to talk through some scenarios that we are trying to also troubleshoot and provide support for. As the provost said, that the guiding principle for remote instruction is reserved for COVID circumstances. We know that that could include many different kinds of things, some of which we'll cover in a few minutes. But we also are sensitive to the fact that we are in a situation where COVID situation can mean many different ways that people's lives are affected. For all the reasons Tom just said, in terms of having to maintain in-person modality, we are trying to support our students and our colleagues who are teaching to really accommodate the students who need to be remote. We know that there are short-term and long-term remote access. We're going to talk about the short-term. Short-term refers to occasions when a student may have to quarantine, either because of their own positive test, exposure to someone, or if they have a child who may have been in a school that has to quarantine, they may request an instructor to grant them temporary remote access. This would be possible by the instructor allowing them to Zoom in. This is the kind of thing that we don't need, that the institution doesn't need broad institutional reporting on. It needs to be informed to the instructor. The long-term remote is what Tom just went through. This is when students have petitioned because either for visa reasons or health reasons or life reasons, they are not able to participate. Of those 500, given those 500, roughly 600 students who have been granted remote long-term access, we see that it affects roughly about 400 courses. So this is something that many of us are having to navigate. What does it mean to incorporate and to engage remote students in our courses? What we are trying to do then from a support perspective is provide various forms of support to allow instructors who are teaching to be responsive without being burdened with all manner of approvals and whatnot. So for example, if a student comes to instructors and has a short-term need, the instructor has that purview. If it's a long-term need, again, you report to Division of Student Affairs. Now, what happens if an instructor themselves has to request remote accommodations? What we are seeing is that in the short term, we've talked with the provost's office and the task force, and the best mode of action has been to recommend that there are ways that the instructor can either work with a course assistant, a teaching assistant, or, and we have several cases of instructors not being able to be in courses at various times, to teach remotely and then have support for in-person students. If it's a long-term need, and long-term means more than 3 courses or longer than 10 days due to COVID, then the provost is requesting that we finalize a process for applying for long-term accommodations. And the way we're thinking through this is to let the department chair know, and then the department chair would work with the provost to talk about how to provide remote coverage for, either remote coverage for or remote access for the instructor. We want to reemphasize, as Tom just did, that failure to vaccinate is not an exemption, without exemption is not a reason for remote access. We know that we are hearing from many, some faculty and students that they are not able to either get to class or they're not able to complete the green check process. And so for that case, they are working with OASID, and then they are working with the Division of Student Affairs to be granted what the TC is calling temporary remote access. This information will be shared with everyone who is teaching weekly up until drop add. So you will get notice of who is remote, who has been granted temporary or long-term remote access weekly from the registrar. What this allows instructors to do is roughly by drop add, you should have, after drop add, you'll get a final list of who has been approved for remote. If we go to the next slide. Next slide. What we are saying is that this is where we are right now, that we roughly have majority of our students are in person. We have a few people, a handful of people, as we said, who've been granted full remote access for the semester. We know that there's a smaller number who have some short-term remote access for this next few weeks. And then we know that, and that's what the current picture is. But we also know that it's possible, given the way the Delta variant is unfolding, given all kinds of uncertainty, that it may be that we have a number of circumstances that create other forms of uncertainty. For example, a student gets sick and needs to quarantine, a student's child must quarantine and they can't come to campus, a student in the course tests positive and the unvaccinated students must quarantine, a student is waiting for all their vaccination requirements to be met, a student must become a caregiver due to long-term due to COVID-related reasons.
and similar reasons for instructors as well. And the bottom line is that there's a lot of variation and unpredictability that may be possible. And so for that process, but in order to maintain some degree of consistency, we are once again, and we're going to say this several times, requesting that remote access be related to COVID reasons. So the final note we just wanted to kind of say before going in through to scenarios was to really emphasize that one of the things that we've heard from many of our colleagues is that going online and then now having to navigate remote access, there are a number of pedagogical questions that have come up. How do I incorporate students into my class? But also, what happens to pedagogical flexibility? I want to reemphasize something that's been said a few times, which is the aim right now, in order to be able to provide the support that courses need to manage the technology, to manage the participation, to manage the multiple modes of engagement, is to really limit the way that we think about hybridity to those COVID-related needs. But in order to support continued pedagogical flexibility and creativity, DFI was going to continue to talk with folks to ask about different forms of practice and pedagogical practice and decisions people are making, so that not only this semester is as least bumpy as possible, but that moving forward, we learn from what people have done. I'm going to turn it over to Charles now, who's going to go through a few scenarios that's going to help people with their decision-making in terms of how do I think about granting or not remote access.
Thank you so much, Lalitha. So apologies, this is going to be a little bit dry, but we just want everyone to be absolutely crystal clear on the processes that we want to work with just at the moment for this semester. Again, it's temporary, but if a student comes to you asking for remote access, you don't need to investigate it. Instructors don't need to kind of figure out whether they're telling the truth or not. You just need to ask if they're asking for a COVID-related reason or not. But you don't need to go into whether that is because they've tested positive. And if the student says, "Well, no, it's my job. I've got a clash," then what we're requesting that you do is that in that case you find some other way of accommodating them. Maybe they can make things up in a different way. Perhaps you recorded the lecture. Maybe they can come to office hours and figure something out. But you don't give them the option to remote in. Again, this is temporary. In the future, we want to be able to incorporate remote instruction in creative and interesting ways. But right now, we're trying to focus on getting everyone to come back to campus and set that norm. In the case that the student says, yes, it's COVID related, again, you don't need to investigate it. You don't need to figure out if they're telling the truth or anything. You just remind them that there is a daily health screening and that they should fill that out, and we will capture if they have a positive test or anything like that, and then that process will unfold and you don't need to be involved in that. It's best to give them permission in writing and to remind them that this is for less than 10 days or 3 classes. And then if you have remote students already, then you can use the same arrangement that you have. If you haven't had any remote students before, please reach out to DFI. The best way to do that is to go to the website and hit the big blue button that says, can we help? How can we help you? So that is our first short-term temporary request for remote access to an instructor from a student process. So if we can go to scenario 2, this would be if a student wants a longer than 10 days or more than 3 classes to go remote. And in this case, you need to direct them to student affairs. And so these circumstances are going to be more complicated and probably will involve other units, such as OASID. So there's not really a one-size-fits-all here, but once they've gone to the Division of Student Affairs, that will be taken care of, and either then the student will come back to you with an answer, or you'll get the appropriate alerts or emails from the appropriate office that has dealt with the request. Like I said, they can be complicated. They can involve different health conditions and different life circumstances. So yeah, there's not kind of a one-size-fits-all. But again, you end up in the same position. If you have remote students before, great, you can keep using that process. If you don't, please come to the DFI website and ask us how to do that effectively, and we'll work with you to make that happen. Great. So what happens for instructors? Here's the process. If you can't hold a class, again, the heuristic, the North Star for us is remote instruction is for COVID-related reasons, and that goes for instructors as well. So what we'd like you to do, if it's not a COVID-related reason, is to possibly run through every possible other arrangement that you could do and not rely on remote instruction, even if it's a sudden emergency. Instead, reschedule the class or have the CA do an activity or something like that. If it is COVID-related, we'd also really appreciate it if you would run through alternative arrangements first before you go to the remote instruction option. But if it is COVID-related, you don't have to tell anyone necessarily what it is or anything like that. You can institute that. Please reach out to DFI if you haven't done that before. One thing that we'd like people to keep in mind is to actually have the students attend the class, even if you're not there, so that they should still meet. And if you have a CA, great, the CA can be there. If you don't have a CA or a TA, then please reach out to DFI and we'll try to figure out how we can make that happen with you, depending on your class and how it works. Again, if it's in the moment, maybe just the best option is to try to reschedule the class though. So that's temporary situation for instructors. And then the last one is the easiest one, simplest one. If you need to take your class remote for a longer period of time, so more than 3 classes, then please talk to your department chair. They'll contact the provost, something will get worked out. The bottom line is that we will probably have to reclassify your course with the registrar for reporting reasons. So that's why it needs to go through this process. So hopefully that is now clearer, and really grateful for everyone to working with us. We think that this is the best way to set norms of people coming back to campus. So that's why it's being done like this. And I think I'm going to hand back to Leith. Oh, no, I've been doing this one too. So there's an information sharing portion to this. So just to summarize, students are sharing this information if it's short-term with their instructor and then with the daily health screening. If they're going long-term, they are going to the Division of Student Affairs and then possibly the registrar. For faculty, in the short term, there's no direct reporting requirement, but what DFI will be doing is we'll be randomly sampling the instructors each week and asking them not for the names of students, but just the number of students they have allowed to have remote in their class. And this serves a few purposes. It allows the different units to kind of adjust their service to what the situation is on the ground. And it also allows us to understand what students are asking for. So if you do get that survey, and you probably will at some point in the semester, it would be great if you could fill it out as quickly as you can. Again, it's just a gross number. It's not names. It's not a whole lot of information. It'll probably end up being 3 numbers. And then the last bucket we've got here is if you are seeking long-term remote instruction, please talk to your department chair. Great. Now I think I can hand back to Letha. I think you need to turn your mic on, Letha.
Thank you. We've been talking about remote access. We wanted to review some of the mechanics of support that exist, mechanisms of support. Many of you already are aware of this, but we'll review it, and you can always find all of this information on the DFI website. So there are 4 types of classrooms, and they're classified based on the type of classroom, the type of technology available in that classroom to support remote instruction. Each classroom type, A, B, C, or D, has the same technology. Everyone who is teaching should place a media services request for their courses. What this allows media services to do is make sure that the technology you need in that course is set up before you come to the course. The hardware, if there's any issues with hardware, the camera isn't working, there's the screen won't come down or open, turn on, those are all media services requests and issues that they can help you address. If you have a question about how to use some of the technology, if you need help positioning the camera, that's something you can definitely reach out to Digital Futures Institute for. All of the courses, some of you have been asking about this, all of the Canvas course sites have been populated with Zoom links. What this means is that it has been automated so that you instructors do not have to generate them themselves. Any student who is enrolled in the course can technically use the Zoom link. Now, this is something that has come up, and what we are saying is we are letting students know we are in person, and unless they have remote access, official remote permission, they are expected to show up in class. Some folks have said, I've always had remote access in my class periodically. And so whereas, just as we've been saying, just as was said earlier, the courses that are designated as in person from an institutional reporting perspective need to remain in person. And that's why we want to be able to be really clear about who can have remote access. Right now, no student in the course who is enrolled in the course needs a passcode to access the Zoom. We are recommending that we leave this open without passcode until the end of DropAd, when you'll know finally who is in your course. And then we're going to recommend that we turn on the passcodes. And at that point, that will be completely up to the instructor to then hand out the passcode for accessing Zoom. Now, students who are not enrolled in class will need a passcode to get in. Some folks have reached out to us to say, I might want some student who wants to listen to a course who might be remote, come in. We can definitely help you with thinking through what the details of that might be. And we definitely don't want to encourage folks who are teaching to use their own personal passcode, personal Zoom links for course experiences. Not only does it increase concerns about security, but having consistent Zoom links allows for a more consistent experience for our students. Like we said earlier, this issue of Zoom access has come up, and we are going to continue working with the registrar's office to submit or send to everyone who's teaching weekly updates about which students have been granted remote access. These weekly reports continue through the DropAd period, at which point enrollment will hopefully stabilize and you'll receive a final list. Anyone else, if they need remote access that's COVID related, the instructor can grant the remote access for temporary periods of time and then follow the process as shared above for short and long-term requests. If a student needs long-term remote access, the process moving forward is going to be, as we said earlier, to reach out to OASID to receive the accommodations necessary or the remote access necessary. And if you are unsure, there are a few ways that you can continue. You can really get details about who is remote. You can check the emails, and if you are not receiving weekly emails from the registrar, you can reach out to DFI and let us know, and we'll make sure that you are getting the weekly emails. Department chairs are also being sent lists every week of all students who are granted remote access in all the courses in that department. So not just the department students, but all students enrolled in department courses. So another place you can go to ask is the department chair. And finally, and we want to encourage you to use those first two options first. But if you are not able to get information from those two spaces or processes, the Office of Student Division of Student Affairs does have that master list of all students who've been granted long-term remote access. The final thing I'll just say before handing it over to Charles to talk about the specific forms of support is that some people have reached out to various folks and have concern about what happens if students decide of their own volition to Zoom in. This is a pedagogical question. This is not a technological question. It's true, they can if they're enrolled in the class. And what we can try to do as a whole community is really to remind our students that remote access is for COVID-related reasons. And I think that's the message that we are trying to continue to support and push forward. We can continue to help you think through some options there, but that's the message that's going out to students over and over again, and hopefully the message that we're all receiving as instructors. Charles, do you want to talk about ISAs?
Yeah, so just quickly, if we go to the next slide. So we have been working with what we're calling instructional support associates. Over the summer, they have been reaching out to hopefully most of the instructors and helping with setting up Canvas. And for the next 2.5, 3 weeks, up until September 21st at drop, they will be visiting classes to collect information on what is working and what is not working. A lot of the technology that is in the classrooms is new, and we haven't worked with it before at scale. We've been testing with stuff all summer, but that doesn't mean that it's going to work the same way with real students in a real classroom. So if you see an instructional support associate, they will be identified because they'll be wearing a t-shirt with instructional support written on it, and they might duck into your classroom. They are told to be as unobtrusive as possible. But if you have a concern about something to do with the technology or the way of working with remote students or any kind of pedagogical piece, feel free to signal them to wait, and then you can tell them your concern and they will take a note of it. And we collect all that information every single day. They meet, we try to troubleshoot it and iteratively change and get more effective every single day. One thing I'll say about instructional support associates is that they aren't tech fellows and they're not CAs or TAs. They are not students. Many of them have advanced degrees in educational technology. They are professionals. We think we've got a really good group. There are a limited number. We have 12, so that's why they kind of fan out and visit classrooms throughout the weeks. After that time, we will decide the most effective way to utilize them for the rest of the semester. So that's another reason why they're collecting information during ad drop. Great. So I think we're going to now move on to the summary of today. The top line really is remote access is restricted to COVID-related circumstances. If anyone asks, tell them that. Tattoo it on yourself. That's the absolute number one point we're trying to get across. If you need any assistance in setting up remote access, please reach out to DFI at the website using the big blue button. The long-term and short-term permission for remote access are different, and they have different processes. And if you want to go into the details, the guidelines are available on the preparedness website under remote access to class. So I think now we are going to move to the Q&A section. So where we take live questions from the audience. If you'd like to ask a question, please put it into the YouTube chat. And any questions that we can't answer in the next 15 minutes or so, we will turn into answers that will go on the FAQ on the preparedness website. So if you have a burning question, please don't be shy. Put it into the YouTube chat right now. I think the other, so bring everybody back and maybe some new faces even. The Q&A. So our first question is, how can we get students to show up in person if the remote Zoom link is available to all students enrolled in the course? How are we supposed to police that? So I might throw this to Lalitha to start with, and then maybe Stephanie might want to add something.
Yeah, this is a real question, a concern that many, I wouldn't say many, but some faculty and instructors have raised. And I would respond in a couple of ways. I think there's the official kind of institutional piece, which I will defer to Stephanie to talk about. Pedagogically speaking, I think this is a conversation. This is a conversation with our students about what participation looks like, and if participation, if student is granted remote access, then participation looks a certain way. If a student is not granted remote access, participation looks another way. I think it's going to be an ongoing conversation, and I think the concern about will students just opt to Zoom in is not one to be taken lightly. But I do think the message is we are in person. We are in person for a reason, and that if you have not been granted a remote permission, then the expectation for you in this course is that you will be in person. Stephanie?
So I completely agree. I think doing as much proactive work in the beginning of class is going to be, as is possible, is going to be critical. So reminding people about the community aspect of things so that it's not just about their individual choice, but it's also about their classmates' experience, your experience as an instructor, the way that you've prepared the course, I think are important pieces to emphasize, and just coming back to the fact that their choices impact other people.
Great. I might just add, I wouldn't rely on Zoom as a barrier to students necessarily. The technology doesn't work that way, unfortunately. So the next question, if we could have that up again. I taught once this week, and the owl was not enough in a large classroom. With the AC going, remote students could, for the most part, hear me, but not their classmates. Suggestions? Thanks. So there's a few different pieces to this, I think. We might, Letha probably has some pedagogical piece, and Hank might have something about the AC and managing sound.
Yeah.
Start, Letha?
Sure. This is, again, another one that's come up a few times about the way the technology is adequate or not to be responsive to the actual course makeup. So one of the things that I think would be helpful is to have that, if that person wants to reach out to us and say, and give that specific example, we can have an ISA come out. We can have one of our instructional designers come out and just get a sense of what is happening with the kind of ability for the OWL to do this. And I think there might be some options in terms of both how we think about organizing the room, whether we might incorporate a laptop, what small group could look like, different grouping sizes. I'm going to send the AC questions to Hank. But the other sort of pedagogical piece that comes to mind is, our media services colleagues are making available some additional technologies to be able to mitigate some of these additional challenges. And if something didn't work this week, please let us know so that we can try to adjust it for the coming weeks. Hank?
Sure, thank you. And just to address the AC question, I mean, that's a little tougher, as you can imagine. I mean, one of the main things we've done over the last year was actually change the AC systems, or specifically crank them up so that we're having a certain amount of air changes per hour. We do 6 or 7 air changes per hour to bring fresh air into each of the classrooms that have central AC to it. The ones that don't have central AC, we put air purifiers in there. So I think we'd want to be careful about what we do there. But by all means, if it is making a lot of noise, you can put it on work order, and we'll come and address it. As well as if DFI or media services is made aware of it, we can get brought into it as well and see if it's safe to somehow adjust the HVAC to try to reduce the noise.
Great. Okay, the next question. If we don't pass the campus access check-in, like we have a runny nose or slight cough and a normal cold, will instructors be denied access? I think that's for Hank or Lisa.
Yeah, I think one of the key things we should think about is, is the daily health screening, that's the daily health screening can be done at home and can be done before you come to the front door. So if you're not feeling well and you need to check a box that says you're not feeling well, which will deny you access to the front door. You can kind of go into one of those charts that Charles showed before if you need to temporarily not hold a class in person. But if you are showing COVID symptoms or things like that, and you think you've been exposed, you should fill out the daily health screening the right way, and you should not be in class and not potentially spreading it. So my suggestion it would be to not wait until you get to the door. But if you're not feeling well when you wake up in the morning and you know you have a 5 o'clock class, start to address it at that point in time. I don't know if Lisa had anything more to say.
Yeah, I was just going to reiterate, folks look through the questions on the DHS. It gives you a sense of the symptoms related to COVID, because I know, we have fall allergy season, and there are a number of things that if you have a, stuffy nose or you're not feeling well, that could be equated to COVID. But what we've done in the daily health screen is really spell it out. So, if you are concerned about that, I would definitely err on the side of caution, and do that prior to coming to campus. So just to reiterate what Hank said, so that you can determine whether it's I need to call out or I need to report it through DHS. And then you'll be contacted by the EHS team to go through kind of whether you've had exposure and so forth.
One thing I found is that for vaccinated folks, sometimes what COVID looks like is a bad cold. And so I would certainly err on the side of caution in that case.
So next question is a good one. Are masks available if a student, faculty forgets, loses their mask? Are clear masks available? Hank, do you want to handle that one?
Sure. So we definitely expect everybody to arrive on campus with a mask. But again, things happen. A mask might break. It may be left on the train for whatever reason. And the public safety offices do have masks, which they can distribute if one of those things occur. So my suggestion would go to the main door of St. Cal. That's where you would pick up a mask. We are not supplying clear masks. We are supplying just the standard disposable ones that we all use. But with one caveat, and Marissa's on here, and maybe she can expand it on a little bit. We are supplying clear masks to OASID to work with individuals who have hearing issues. So I'm not sure if Marissa can expand on that a little bit, but it's really going through that office, and that's the only office who we're supplying the clear masks to.
Safety. You able to hear me okay? Okay. They are available to make it easier for those that are deaf or hard of hearing to communicate through the clear panels. So if any students or staff, faculty are deaf or hard of hearing, they should reach out to OASID if they are on campus, and we'll be communicating with others so that we can go through the process with them to receive masks as a disability-related accommodation, because it would be considered an accommodation. And at that point, we will work with students and staff to assess each classroom situation to determine which community members will also need those clear masks to communicate.
Oh, here's a doozy. I deleted all the Zoom links in my Canvas course and will give the link to those who have been approved to be remote. Isn't that a better procedure? Maybe I'll handle this. I am not sure that is a better procedure. You are free to utilize Zoom in the way that you think is most effective for your class. You will know what is best for your class. We do things at scale for everyone to make things hopefully less of a burden for you. The problem we have with Zoom, and if you're very interested in it, then please reach out to DFI and we can go through it in detail because there's a lot of details, is that you cannot make a per student passcode and regulate a remote student across lots of classes. So we have to make per class passcodes and per class access, which makes it a little bit administratively difficult. We think we have the best procedure to roll out to everyone for that. But definitely there could be circumstances where that doesn't work for you. And if you want us to work with you on that, please reach out, not a problem. If you think you can handle it, also great. But does anyone want to add to that? Okay, hopefully that. What's the email address we should direct students to for obtaining permission for remote participation? So I'll ask Tom to say it because he can probably say it better than I can.
Sure. So the first response I think is really where you should direct students to is the COVID student care, covidstudentcare@tc.columbia.edu. That's the best place to refer to. And there's a team of us in student affairs that are looking at that email. So you don't need to send them to that return to campus. They're already on campus. That emails, hopefully won't continue to be so populated anymore. And so let's send them to the COVID student care.
So I think that's where we're going to wrap it. Thank you so much to everyone who spoke, and thank you for joining us to learn about all the nitty-gritty of how we're rolling things out. Very best wishes to everyone for a successful, safe, healthy semester. And I think we're on YouTube, so do we have to say like and subscribe? Or so I'll see everyone later. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye,
Bye-bye.
everyone. Thank
Bye.
you.